How much of this is just all tied into, I mentioned politics before, but really political ideologies? Because everything you're describing really sounds like the roots of socialism to me. and you're trying to fight it back with the roots of libertarianism. Or classical liberalism, or just something about your capacity as a human versus the system that's just trying to strip everyone of their individualism.
Again, I'm going to sound horrible. I wouldn't credit it as socialism or anything like that. I think there are different ideological standpoints here.
Well, it's artificial standards, it's artificial outcomes that are not based in anything, which I would describe, I guess, basically as socialism.
I think it comes back to something that we were talking about a while ago in relation to parenting and the perception that you have of people. And I guess I've never really described myself as a libertarian, but I guess where I could be caricatured as a libertarian is because I do think that I trust people. And the reason why I like the idea of individual freedom is because I think people are best placed to decide for themselves what they can hear, what they want to listen to, what they want to read. And this is why I would be very much in favour of personal liberty. And I think so few people have that nowadays. And I think a lot of the kind of safe space culture and the calls for censorship from both the left and the right come from this absolute fear of people and lack of trust of people. So this assumption that if you hear a radical Islamic cleric, for example, as a young Muslim man, you're immediately going to be radicalised and want to go off and join ISIS. But really interesting, there's a couple of articles in The Guardian in the UK today, but commenting on what's going on in the US and commenting on the alt-right and the kind of Breitbart. And they're saying that we need to be more concerned about the impact of papers like Breitbart and the alt-right and the influence that they are having radicalising young white men. So these young white men, they sit in their bedrooms on their own and they read these alt-right websites and they're brainwashed. And they have no capacity to think critically about what they're reading. They're just brainwashed and they're radicalised, and then they become misogynistic and racist and anti-Semitic because of what they've read online. But at heart, this speaks to a complete lack of trust in people and a really degraded concept of people. They think they're idiots, essentially.
Right. So on one hand, it's sort of, there's a little bit of both there, because on one hand, you're acknowledging that the education system has led people to a point where it's possible that you might just sit in your room, read some stuff, not have the ability to critically think. So on one hand, right, like you're agreeing that that could be possible. On the other hand, it's such a discount of what our faculties are as people, that are what our sort of native ability to figure out truth and critically think is. So that's a really strange place to be in. But I am seeing this all over the U.S. right now. Is Breitbart going to be the wing of the Republican Party and Trumpism and all that? And it's like, well, there are plenty of propaganda things on the other side too.
Absolutely. And this
and I don't have good things to say about either one of them, by the way.
But absolutely, this kind of assumption that you read something and then you immediately act on it. There's been the whole thing in the UK following the referendum for leaving the EU. The Leave campaign, it was all based on lies. And what's really being said there is, and all these people who voted Leave, they were so stupid that they could not think critically. They could not differentiate truth from lies. They just believed everything that they were told.
So it's the media just telling them that they're stupid, which is partly why they voted that way in the first place. So they're really doubling down on it. I'm curious, so you've mentioned this already, but how much do you see? Do you think that Trump parallel to Brexit really is just right there? Because I mentioned to you before, I had Steve Davies on from the London School of Economics as part of our Learn Liberty partnership, and it was right before the election, and he basically said, Brexit happened, so I think Trump can happen. And that's why it really did sort of get me around to that this thing was real, and that's why I do not mock all of these people. Do you think that all of it was a confluence of basically the same things?
No. No.
Great.
I think there's lots of very interesting parallels that we can draw. And I think the main parallel is that it's essentially sticking the finger up to the establishment in both UK and the US, we've had enough of being told what to do. We've had enough of being told how to think. We, in the privacy of the voting booth, we will assert our right not to be told what to do. But I think it gives Trump too much credit, and it degrades the concept of Brexit. Yeah. I mean, Brexit, the vote for Brexit, I think, was a vote for independence, a vote for freedom. And the most important point about the Brexit vote was it was not for any one particular candidate. So now you see Nigel Farage coming and having his photo taken next to Donald Trump, kind of chummying up and everything. And he's trying to claim ownership of Brexit as if this was all his doing, and as if it was a vote for him. It absolutely wasn't. Right,
he was a piece of it, but it was not. He didn't get power because of it.
Exactly. So lots of people, myself included, voted leave to leave the EU without for 1 second endorsing Nigel Farage. We did not think Nigel Farage represented us. We did not want Nigel Farage to represent us. We hate an awful lot of the things that he stood for, and yet still felt able to vote leave, because the vote leave was a vote for independence, a vote for freedom. For me, it was about saying, I want to be able to vote out the people who make laws that have an impact upon my life. And I think that's a really basic, fundamental right of a democracy. If you live in a democratic society, if laws are made that affect your life, you should have the right to vote out the people who are making those laws. And under the EU, we don't. But that said nothing about what laws you do want to have, or who you want to be governing you, or what kind of system you do want to live for. It was a reaction against, we want that freedom.
Right.
Whereas the vote for Trump is a vote for something. It is a vote that's going to give power to one individual.
Right.
So it might stem from the same root cause. There might be that same desire to tell the establishment we've had enough, but they're very, very different.
That's interesting, because I definitely think both were the FU to the establishment for sure. But it's interesting because you described the Brexit exit as it was a vote for independence. I think you said independence and liberty, or independence and freedom. And I think a lot of the Trump people would say the exact same thing. So you're saying the root cause is sort of the same, but there's a real difference in saying, this guy is going to save me versus our system has to
change so that we can get the right people in, so we can have that discussion. Would we want a Donald Trump figure, or would we want somebody else? That now, I mean, unfortunately not now, because we haven't actually had Brexit, even though we voted for it.
Right.
The vote to leave opens the door, as far as I'm concerned, to have that debate about who do we want to run the country, who do we want to represent us, what laws do we want to govern our society. Whereas in America, you didn't have that option. There wasn't on the ballot box, I want to throw the system out and have a new
We already
system.
did that with you guys 200 years ago, so it wasn't necessary to do again. So as even if these things aren't completely equals, there's obviously a lot of parallels here.
Yeah.
So my next question to you is, I've spent a lot of the last 2 years talking about how I see the left going off the deep end here, and it's really been explained perfectly by so many of the things you're talking about. If we were to look at the left in Britain since Brexit, have they taken a look at themselves? Have they looked in the mirror, or have they just doubled down? Because I suspect our left here is only going to get further left. I think it's going to get more violent. I think they're going to put more what you would argue are unjust or foolish protests, et cetera, et cetera. So did they do any of that? Was there any of nothing?
I wish.
Yeah.
I wish. No, it's really, really interesting, because obviously the vote leave for the EU, vote leave won. I mean, it didn't win by a huge margin, but it did win. Now, the Labour Party came out, Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party, admittedly late in the day, admittedly reluctantly, but he came out in favour of Remain, and he argued for Remain. And, everybody knew, it was a kind of open secret in the country, that Jeremy Corbyn wasn't really that enthusiastic about remaining in the EU, that he actually was, by instinct, somebody who wanted to leave the EU.
Why would someone that's on the left, like Corbyn, want to leave, though, if he's okay with more state power as a general rule?
But, I mean, this is where you can get into the history of the left. And, I mean, I joined the Revolutionary Communist Party when I was at university. I'm somebody who comes from a left tradition. But, you know, when I was very passionate about being a revolutionary communist, it was not because I wanted so much more state control. I still believed in all the things about freedom and liberty and free speech that I believe in now. But those things weren't seen as being opposite to left-wing views. It was not seen as being this huge contradiction. And the thing that kind of really upsets me nowadays is it's almost as if a political right has taken ownership of things like free speech and academic freedom. And you have to really make the case to people that arguing for freedom and arguing for academic freedom, free speech on campus, are not inherently right-wing.
No, they're liberal principles, classical liberal principles. But I guess we've just failed. I guess we've just failed.
Yeah, I mean they were. I mean the same with kind of economic progress or. You know, wanting to build new houses, build runways, build infrastructure in your country, progress, you know, that was at one point not a million miles away from what the left was arguing. So the left has completely transformed. So Jeremy Corbyn, I think he's much more of akin to a kind of Bernie Sanders figure in the US, and he's from that type of generation. So Tony Benn was another kind of hero of the left, I mean, dead now, where these people came from a tradition where they did have some scepticism about the EU, you know, where they did have some belief in human freedom, and sovereignty and democracy. But now they're kind of made to seem like relics of a bygone era. They seem to like old and, you know, there's a bit of a cult around Corbyn for many people, but the ideas that they propagate are kind of seen by all the PR types now who surround the Labour Party as being too dangerous, too out there, you know, won't win the vote, so you've got to rein it in, you've got to argue something different. So Corbyn came out late in the day and argued this Remain position. They lost. So you think then it would be a good opportunity for him to stand up and say, well, I didn't believe in that anyway.
Right.
You know, really, this was my position. This was what I wanted to argue. But no. So you've got the Liberal Democrats, a very, very ironically named party, and you've got the Labour Party in the UK, who, you know, seem absolutely determined to argue either for a second referendum or to argue to water down the Brexit vote.
So they don't like the results of an absolutely democratic. I mean, it really is. There's so many parallels here.
Absolutely. And you know, if they wanted to connect with the people, to me, it would seem like the logical thing to do to have that period of reflection, to step back, to think, you know, why are we so out of kilter? And again, you know, you see this completely in academia. So they did a poll of academics before the referendum, and 90% of academics were going to vote Remain, and obviously they lost. So you see two things. You see how, on the one hand, how this kind of real chasm that's opening up between what academics think, what members of the Labour Party think, and what the general public thinks, and also this kind of real homogeneity within academia and within the Labour Party. They all think the same, and they all think something different to what everyone else is thinking.
So I'm going to try to spin this positively again. I have a feeling you might be able to fix me here. But in some ways, this is the greatest strength of our democracies, for Britain and for the United States, that all the establishment, the media, the elites, the people with money, the power, all that could want something, and the people in our two countries said, we want something else. Now, ultimately, maybe Brexit will be a bad move, maybe the Trump presidency will be a bad move, but that almost everyone in the rest of the world would be incredibly jealous of the power that we wield over the people who control us.
And do you know what? You're absolutely right. And that's what gets me out of bed in the morning, because that is so exciting, that possibility, that opportunity that you can change the world. But the problem is, you know, people have got this amazing power, and it's so wonderful, and I think it really should be celebrated. Come New Year's Eve, you know, I'll be having a glass of champagne and saying hooray for these things, because I think 2016 should go down in history as the year that people stood up to these elites and showed them, no, we've had enough. We want democracy. We want to have a say in how our lives are governed, and we don't like the way you're taking us. And I think that's absolutely glorious and absolutely something that should be celebrated. But yeah, you can see then, so I described students as having a temper tantrum.
Right.
I mean, I think this is then what you're getting from the elite in the media and academics and the political establishment, is this kind of temper tantrum then. And you think if there was any degree of rationality, there would be this step back, this period of reflection. Where did we go wrong? You know, why have we grown so distant? Why has this gap opened up? But they can't do that. They can't get beyond the toddler tantrum. And it's just hull abuse. You know, you're all sexist, you're all racist, you're all homophobic, you're all horrible.
And it's not working anymore. And it's not working. And that's why, wouldn't it be crazy to think if 10 years ago, if someone would have said to you, you know, the way that your side, your political philosophy is going to get a win is by Britain leaving the EU. Would you have thought they were crazy probably 10 years ago?
I don't know. I mean, I think I don't think we were even having those discussions 10 years ago.
Right, so the idea of it would have been insane. So if someone would have said that, then you would have said, well, that's a crazy idea. Because for me, it's like, if someone would have said to me 10 years ago, the way that the social justice warriors and this machine and the elites and all that would get their first loss in a long time, their first major loss, would be if Trump was president. I would go, first off, the whole Trump being president would be nuts. I mean, I would go, you're bonkers. And yet, even though I didn't support Trump, here we are. I see a great opportunity here.
Absolutely. And I think the thing that's really interesting is how, on both sides of the Atlantic, the pollsters have got it wrong, have got it so wrong. And I think there's two things going on there. I think you create this climate, and I was speaking to people in San Diego yesterday at one of these anti-Trump protests. And so this guy said to me, oh, you know, he voted Trump. He said, my dad's told me not to tell anyone this. His dad was stood next to him. You know, that these people, they can get nasty if you tell them. And I spoke to a woman as well who said to me, oh, I was independent. And it's only later I thought, oh, you know, I wonder if she's saying independent because she doesn't want to come out and say she voted for Trump. So when you get this kind of response from academia, media, you know, political elite, you create this climate where people don't want to say who they're going to vote for. They feel they can't say out loud. And so putting that cross in the voting booth becomes this complete act of rebellion. So I think that makes it harder for the pollsters to predict how things are going to go because people just won't say. And why should they? You know, they don't have to. But people just won't say. But you know, the left needs to look at itself. Why have they created this climate, this censorious, moralistic climate where people won't say who they're going to vote for? But then I think the other thing that's going on is the pollsters are so much a part of this bubble and so much just have their own ideas reflected back to them that they are incredulous that people can think differently. So when they take these polls and it comes back, oh, you know, people are going to vote Remain and people are going to vote for Hillary, they believe them because that's what they think
Feels
themselves.
Good.
Yeah. So they don't go beyond that. They don't question what people really think.
Yeah.
You've got this kind of growing gap there.
Yeah. Well, on that note, I think this has actually all been framed in there's sort of a depressing state of what's happening here, but a hopeful future because some of this stuff is being unfurled and people like you are out there talking about it.
Well, I think it does. It creates a really good opportunity for people to say, let's go and you know, the future's ours, essentially. You know, we need to take people seriously. I think that's really important. Take people seriously and win people over with arguments, not just through crying and banning things, but actually have proper arguments with people, rational political debate, and assume that people are capable of engaging in that rational political debate. And you can't just hurl insults and cry at people and expect them to change their minds that way. But it means that if you do take people seriously, you do engage in debate with people, it's all to play for.
Yeah,
really
they
exciting.
might say some things you disagree with and you got to be okay with that too. Yeah. Well, I always say, if I don't look down once, it's a good interview. I did not look at those once. So thank you so much. And I want to thank my guest, Joanna Williams, and our partner, Learn Liberty, for sending her our way. You can follow Joanna on Twitter. It's at JoWilliams293. Thanks. And thanks to Larry King and all the Aura team, by the way. And we'll do it again next week.